Hi, it's Dr. Sonia Doherty, naturopathic doctor. I'm so excited to introduce you to our new team member, Rachel Ona, who's a naturopathic medical graduate from the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine, where she was an all-star intern and did rounds in the pediatric shift and has done extra training in methylation, which is what we're going to talk about today. Rachel graduated from York with a Bachelor of Science degree with honors in biology. She has worked in a variety of pharmacies over the last 8 years, and she is a certified doula. We're so lucky to have Rachel as our newest team member, and I'm excited to have her share with you today how methylation impacts men's health.
Thank you, Dr. Sonia.
Yes, thanks. This is amazing. So I'll start by asking, what is methylation? Let's share more information about methylation for our folks who are watching, whether they're patients or friends or colleagues or family members.
Yeah, sure. So DNA methylation is basically an epigenetic mechanism used by cells to control gene expression. So what that means is like a methyl group is added to a substrate like DNA, RNA, neurotransmitters, and basically it helps allow it to function.
Amazing. So how does this impact things like epigenetics, and what is epigenetics? You hear that term, and what does that mean for our health?
So epigenetics is basically how your behaviors or the environmental factors can change the way your genes work. So this is seen by like turning on and off genes, making DNA and histones, making hormones, neurotransmitters, all different things in your cells. Basically, it just helps them turn on and off. And in turn, downstream helps with like aging, cardiovascular, just being able to be in homeostasis.
Involved in everything, right? That's why it's such a big part of what we talk about at the Natural Care Clinic, because it's a part of every single cell in the body.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this, what impacts someone's methylation? Like if you have, a patient coming to see you, what sort of things are you looking at that would impact how they're methylating or what that looks like in their health?
So we want to look at a variety of different things. We first like to start off with genetics. How is your genes different from somebody else's? So some people may have the MTHFR gene mutation, which basically means that it's causing an underfunctioning of that gene and basically inhibiting the way methylation is working in the body. We also want to look at environmental factors such as air pollution, toxicants, chemicals, heavy metals. Is there like any nutritional deficiencies? Is there pesticides being ingested? Are you under a lot of stress, causing a lot of inflammation? Looking at the microbiome, are you filled with bugs, medications, and then chronic illnesses?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like to be an expert in methylation, you have to be an expert in everything else that impacts methylation.
Exactly. So here is just an overview of how methylation works. We first like to start off with, methionine is the amino acid that is basically the start codon for every single amino acid in the body. And with methylation, it goes through this wheel, and along the way, methylation occurs. So SAMe is, the main methylation amino transmitter, and then we work our way all the way down to homocysteine. And inherently, we want homocysteine to either, if there's a lot of infections, then we want it to go down and make cysteine or glutathione. But if we don't need homocysteine, we want it to be turned back into methionine. And in order for that to happen, we need the MTR to basically take in methyl B12 or methylfolate and basically help break it up and go back into methionine. So what we tend to look at is what happens when, the MTR is not working, or B12 is not methylated properly, or folate's not being methylated properly. How does that inherently affect the body?
Absolutely. I mean, it's actually so complicated, but each individual step has a cofactor and it has different vitamins that if you put in place can really transform, because methylation, as Rachel just explained, is part of so many different aspects of human health.
Yep. And inherently, this slide is just explaining that, you know, there's two main wheels. It's the methionine homocysteine, then there's the 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate wheel. And, you know, as I explained in the previous slide, SAMe delivers methyl to 200 pathways. So this methylation pathway basically has a downstream effect in many different processes in the body.
Yeah, it's great to kind of simplify it, because methylation is powerful and complicated, but it's also pretty straightforward, because if you improve it, you improve human health, right? So this is where you get into your area of expertise, and outside of mine for sure is men's health.
Yes. So, I mean, methylation is super important, and I think people don't realize the effect that it has on men's health. Just looking at the studies, we see that men that, you know, are older and have more gene mutations just because their methylation pathways aren't working as well, it affects their sperm, and in turn, their children have more neurodevelopmental disorders. We can also see that, you know, DNA methylation defects can cause issues with different genes, such as the MEST and the H19. And basically, what that means is it causes male infertility.
Wow. And does this impact libido as well?
It would impact libido, and I'm not sure if we discussed it in the previous slides, but you will see that zinc is used quite a lot in the methylation pathway, and zinc is very important for you know, libido, men's health, testosterone, so it is impacted as well.
Yeah, and that's one thing in the post-COVID era, right? Is so many people who've had COVID have ended up with really, really dramatically lower zinc levels, having a massive impact on all kinds of different systems. So that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. So on this slide, basically is just explaining how the H19 affects men and women differently. As we can see here in the top slide is the maternal allele, and the IGF-2 is usually off, and it's not, and then the ICR is not methylated, which means that it allows the H19 to always be on, and basically affects how it's functioning. Whereas in males, it's meant to usually have the IGF-2 on and the ICR is methylated, and basically the H19 is usually off, allowing the IGF-2 to always be working. So that's why methylation is so important, because if the ICR is not methylated, then that causes the H19 to be on, and in turn, the IGF-2 will continually be off.
That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. So this slide basically just shows how different genes are affected by methylation, and in turn causing issues with sperm function. So as discussed before, MTHFR, if that is dysregulated, it affects, we can see that there's no sperm found in the semen. We see the HLA-C, PAX-A, it can affect sperm motility, sperm function. So all of these different gene markers show that sperm can be affected by methylation.
It's interesting too, because I do obviously, as you know, have a pediatric practice. So I sometimes will talk about, like, in adolescence, it's not like we're trying to promote fertility, right? But fertility actually is a marker of human health.
It
So
is.
even if someone isn't planning to have, you know, babies at this point in their life, or at any point, it's fertility actually is a marker of human health. So it's still really important. I know that the sperm sort of analysis at this point, they're looking at using it as a marker of male health, and you know, that's the extent of what I know. But
And I mean, just to like add on that, I just feel like being healthy it has to start from being a kid. It doesn't just happen when you're an adult. So if you're healthy all the way up and making sure you're methylated as a child, it's going to affect when you're an adult. So I definitely agree with you that it's a marker of health.
yeah, and I have had a few of my young male patients, just I've been practicing for 20 years, and they have been negatively impacted post-COVID with that zinc deficiency impacting their libido. That's why I asked that question. I mean, I did refer them on. Thankfully, I have colleagues like you who can handle those cases. I have so many little ones. But yeah, so tell me about prostate cancer. This is also a fascinating connection.
Yeah, so this is basically a more watered down schematic of the methylation pathway that we saw before, but studies have actually found that hypermethylation, so the methylation pathway working almost too efficiently and more than it should be, can actually be causing prostate cancer. So we can see the GSTP1 gene, the MGMT, and the AR, the cyclin-dependent kinase inhibitors. They basically are hypermethylated, and in turn, it causes hypermethylation on the DNA, RNA, and carcinogenesis occurs. So that's one of the things that I noticed in my research that happens with men.
Wow. So it's really important to have that methylation cycle properly regulated, right? Which means
Exactly.
support in all the different areas.
We don't want too much. We don't want too little. Once again, we want to be in balance, homeostasis.
Absolutely. This is a big one. This is, I think that as I get older, I worry more about my health. And I know that cardiovascular disease for Canadians is still, I think it's still the number one cause of death, right?
Yep.
And unfortunately, so we all need to be thinking about this.
Yeah. And I mean, it's really interesting because they've been studying this since 2005 in this paper. And we just see that how it can affect different areas of cardiovascular health. Is it atherosclerosis? Is it hypertrophy? Many different things. And I remember listening to the Gary Brecker and Joe Rogan podcast, and they talked about how, cardiovascular disease is a lot of the time said as idiopathic, and they don't know what the reason is. And when people do studies, they realize that there is actually issues in methylation pathway, especially buildup in homocysteine, which is causing leaky blood vessels. It's affecting the downstream regulation. So cardiovascular disease, not just in men but also in women, is affected by the methylation pathway.
It's wild. When I first started getting into methylation, like 100 years ago, there was a cardiologist named Frank Sinatra, no joke, and he did such a great explanation of methylation. It was part of helping me understand it. And there's a good documentary. It's called Forks Over Knives, and it talks about some of the soldiers that were unfortunately killed during the Vietnam War. When the soldiers came back, a lot of them unfortunately were quite young, and they already had signs of cardiovascular disease building, right? And I do think with COVID, there's lots of mechanisms post-COVID, I think, that are increasing risk of heart disease. So having methylation as a support for all your cells, I think, is critical for everyone. We're in an age where stress, pandemic, all of those things are increasing risk of disease. So
And this slide is just to reiterate that homocysteine has an effect once it builds up, because your body's not able to break it down by the MTR or the MTHFR gene. Homocysteine is just stuck in your blood vessels, and it can lead to complications such as heart attacks and strokes and all other different cardiovascular diseases.
I didn't realize that it actually contributed to that leaky blood vessel issue. Wow, interesting.
And then once again, methylation also has an effect with weight gain. Different genes such as the CPBA, leptin. It can affect, insulin response. So your appetite is affected, being able to break down fat cells, your insulin response. So weight gain is associated with DNA methylation as well.
I think that's often what brings people in to see naturopathic doctors, particularly after this sort of stressful period. But all of this stuff is connected, right? I think it's the beautiful thing about looking at something like methylation is all kinds of different parts of your body are going to improve.
Yeah, I agree. And, another completely different area, but we see with aging and cognitive decline, I mean, that's also affected by methylation. In the next podcast, we're going to talk a little bit more about, how methylation affects like neurotransmitters and hormones. But, just to touch upon it a little bit here, methylation can affect the way that, the body's able to break down. And we see that the EDAR, ADD mutations, causes slow wound healing and, loss of teeth. And these are the kind of things that you see in aging. The MPTX2, it affects, it's upregulated in Parkinson's disease. So you see these neurocognition issues, all because methylation pathway is not working as efficiently as we want it to be.
It's interesting. When I think about the uh, surgeries, right, is something that I have a interest in, because the surgeries can oxidize things like B12. Like a surgery that's longer than 2 hours could remove a lot of the B12 in the body, which obviously, as you've explained, supports methylation and is a key piece in supporting the methylation cycle. But this is why I want people on methyl B12 injections if possible, if they're in that older cohort. My mom's in that age group, and I feel much better when she's on methyl B12, because I know it's like helping all of these neurological systems, which I do know a little bit more about the brain than men's health. So that's an interesting. I didn't know some of this stuff in there in terms of aging.
Mm-hmm. And so now we're going to move on to lab tests. You know, obviously, naturopathic medicine is more an individualized way of approaching health. So we wouldn't bombard patients with all of these tests. We'll look at, okay, which ones are the exact ones we want to look at. But here's an overview of like things to consider, such as looking at the complete blood cell count, testosterone in men, iron panel, estrogen, folate, active B12. We also want to look at the cholesterol, homocysteine, zinc, copper, vitamin D, and then other markers of like type 2 diabetes, such as the HbA1c. And then genetic testing to kind of see, do they have the mutation in the MTHFR? And then other tests that we also consider looking at is the organic acids test, which gives a comprehensive profile of like the microbiome, nutrition, metabolic, detoxification. We also want to look at SIBO, because SIBO can affect methylation. The Dutch test to look at hormones. So there's many different things that we can assess and look at for methylation, depending on what the picture the patient shows.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in Ontario, we're not allowed to requisition or recommend these tests, but I have people bring me these tests all the time because they've done them and they don't know what to make of them. And methylation, as you've seen, it's complicated, right? And you make a great point, Rachel, in terms of the cholesterol piece too, because methylation governs the production of cholesterol. So that's amazing. Is there, yeah, what can we do to help? Because I think this is the one of, if not the most important part to kind of share with people, is that if there's problems with methylation, there's a lot we can do to help.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, first start off with the B vitamins, because we want to improve methylation. So this is why a lot of the times when NDs find out that patients have issues with methylation, you don't want to use cyanocobalamin, you don't want to use hydroxy, you want to use methyl B12 to improve the methylation pathway. Riboflavin, P5P, vitamin B6. So definitely incorporate B vitamins if you notice that your patient has an issue with methylation. Then you also want to look at other supplements such as folate. You want to improve the folate pathway if that's what's causing the issues. You want to look at SAMe if you're not able to convert methionine downstream to SAMe. Vitamin D, because that's impacted. Omega-3 fish oils, because you want to decrease inflammation. We have other things such as glutathione, carnitine, zinc, creatinine. So, and then also with diet, diet is a big piece in improving methylation health and just being healthy in general. You want to remove grains that can cause inflammation in the body. You want to increase your vegetable intake, such as leafy greens and, cruciferous vegetables. So you want to look at Brussels sprouts and stuff like that, just because you're increasing the vitamin B12 and folate in your diet naturally. So if you have a nutritional deficiency and that's what's causing the issues, you want to add that into your diet.
It's amazing the role the diet plays. I remember being at a conference and they presented a study, and it was on an animal study of rodents, but these rodents had been genetically altered towards having a propensity to obesity. So they were actually overweight animals. And through providing methyl donors, they actually regulated their weight, even though they had a genetic predisposition.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was really cool. There's a special name for the rats. I can't remember what it is now, but that's amazing. I think this is so helpful. the methylation information is exploding, you know, since the Human Genome Project ended in 2003. And I know I still learn almost every week more about methylation. So thank you so much for sharing that. And we're gonna get together again soon and talk about women's health and maybe some other topics related to methylation. So thanks for watching. Share with anyone who you think is interested in methylation and men's health.
Amazing.